Good evening to all friends. It's indeed a pleasure and privilege that on behalf of the Ahmedabad Management Associations, I extend all of you a very warm welcome to this August audience of the webinar on the very interesting topic of yoga for the godless. That is the, in fact, title of the new book being launched. And as the title indicates that yoga through evolved, although it is evolved in a Hindu faith, yoga is for the entire humanity across the globe. Human being is by nature endowed with the perennial peace and a bliss, and in the journey of the self-explorations, the belief in God is not relevant. It's indeed a pleasure and privilege to have us with today a globally renowned master of yoga and Vedanta, Yogi Sri M. And I extend a very warm welcome, Yogi Ji, to you with my salutations to your divine self. Uh, I take this privilege to briefly introduce Yogi Ji, respected Yogi Ji. As many of you would have either read his books or listened to his discourses on YouTube like me. Born as Mumtaz Ali in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, Sri Am is a well-known spiritual teacher, author, social reformer, educationist, and the global speaker. His books, Apprentice to Himalayan Master, a Yogi's autobiography, was published in 2011 and became an instant bestseller book. And later on in the sequence, he also published the book, The Journey Continues, in 2017. Friends, I happened to read both the books, and which has touched my soul and has left the landmark imprint in my life. He is the author of various books on philosophy, yoga, and Indian mysticisms, like the Jewel in the Lotus, Deeper Aspects of Hinduism. Another is Little Guide to Glory and Happier Life, the Upanishads, the Sunya, a novel which is his first novel on meditation on Sunya. Sri Am has established the Satsang Foundation 20 years back. His mission has resulted in several initiatives in the areas of education, community health, environment, and the oneness of the humanity. Among the many awards and the honors that are awarded to him, he has received he has received a prestigious award conferred as a Padma Bhushan Award by Government of India in January 2020 for the distinguished services of a high order in spirituality. Now, Yoga also for the Godless is a book written by him. Practitioners of the ancient science of yoga have long contended that you don't have to be a Hindu in the conventional sense to practice yoga, even though its origin lied in India. Sri Am goes a step further in his new path-breaking books. He proves that one does not even need to believe in God to be a true yogi. Sri Am, as he is a realized yogi and Vedantic scholar, draws on his deep knowledge of ancient Indian scriptures to prove that godless are equally capable as God-inspired of reaching the pinnacle of self-realization, attaining bliss through the yoga practices. Based on the profound understanding of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, this book is a step-by-step guide to the theory and practice of yoga for those who seek to know it better, and also for the young and the millennial who may be stepping out for the first time. In a lucid prose with the photographs for the visual aid, Sri Yogis or Sri Am has taken through the most complex notion of breath, body, and postures with admirable brevity and clarity. This is a comprehensive handbook of yoga uh, for the beginners or those who have those who are the seeker and inquisitiveness to learn more about the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. It is informative and yet comprehensive handbook on yoga, exploration of for the science behind yoga. There is a deep understanding and step-by-step explanation of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras in this book. And essentially all yoga postures are also demonstrated. I show you the title of this book, uh, this Yoga Also for the Godless. And on the rear back leaves, there are yoga postures displayed to facilitate the practitioners uh, and to understand the various yogic postures. There are various yoga sutras in Sadhana Path, Vibhuti Path, and Kaivalya Path. They are explained in a very comprehensively and a brief and lucid way. Uh, Not taking much time between you and revered Sri Yogi Ji, I hand over this platform to revered, respected Sri Yogi Ji. And at the end of these lucid explanations, if the time permits, we will have a question and answer. And this session will close at 7 o'clock. Thank you very much. Please, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Atul Bhai. Thank you, Professor. So, shall I start?
Yes, please, please.
Yeah. So, first of all, let me tell you that the title of the book is not Yoga for the Godless, but Yoga also for the Godless. The also is very important because, first of all, it doesn't mean that those who believe in God cannot practice yoga. It also doesn't mean that those who don't believe in the concept of a creator God, that's what I mean by godless. Somebody who's sitting up there in heaven, fashioning people, throwing them on the earth, and then beating them up and throwing them in hell, and so on. You know, the usual concept of a creator. Even if you don't have that concept, you can still practice yoga. This is the idea of the book. Now, how did it come about? Several young people who want to practice yoga in earnest have come to me and said that they have approached yoga teachers to learn, and they have said that if you need to learn yoga, first you have to chant this sloka or that sloka, or you have to worship this god or that god. They said, but we are very seriously interested in yoga. We are Hindus. We were born as Hindus. We live in this country called Hindustan. So it is nothing against that. But we don't want to believe that we should chant the names or surrender to the teacher to understand yoga. So, can we learn yoga in a different way? Several people have come to me, young people, especially college going, people who don't want to get caught up. So, this book, in one way, is meant for them. In the other way, very rarely is the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali explained sutra by sutra. Everybody skips. They explain asanas. Lots of people, even in Hollywood, they practice asanas. Everywhere they practice. But yoga is not only asanas. There is much more to it than we popularly understand. So, therefore, that is another reason why I wrote this book. Therefore, it's a comprehensive sutra by sutra exposition of the Yoga Sutras. Now, what I want to say is that yoga, even though it's one of the darsanas, important darsanas of Indian ancient Indian philosophy, it derives 90% of its, I would say 85 to 90% of all its terminology from Sankhya. Now, Sankhya and yoga are very closely related to each other. You know, there are Shat Darsanas, six darsanas, including Vedanta, Mimamsa, and so on. Nyaya, Yoga, Sankhya. Now, Sankhya is one of the oldest. Even Vedantists use the terms of Sankhya in many places. Like Tattva is used, taken from Sankhya. And the 24 Tattvas, the three Rajas, uh, Tamas, and Sattva are taken from the gunas are taken from uh, Sankhya. Now, Sankhya is so ancient because it's the author is supposed to be Kapila. Now, Kapila is so important that Vyasa does not miss mentioning him in the Bhagavad Gita. When Krishna talks about his glories, among the mountains, I am the Meru, I am among the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. Now, why he said Samaveda is That requires another big satsang. Let's not get into that. Among the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. He didn't say Rig Veda. And so on. He says, among the Munis, I am Kapila. So in the Gita, if Vyasa has to make Krishna say that among the Munis, I am Kapila, which means Kapila is a great and ancient Muni. Even in the story of Bhagirath, in the Bhagavad, there's a mention of Kapila. So now Sankhya by itself is kind of an atheistic philosophy. I won't say atheistic in the modern sense of the term atheist. It believes in a spirit, which it calls Purusha. And the primordial Purusha is Ishvara, not a creator God. Sankhya believes that the creation takes place through Prakriti, through chemical changes, through various things, which is also being explained by science today. But what science does not mention, materialistic science does not mention, is that there is a consciousness, which they don't believe in. Kapila, on the other hand, believes that there is a consciousness, that there is a Purusha which is behind the Prakriti with all its actions. And this Purusha, in its primordial form of pure wisdom, is Ishvara. It has nothing to do with how the world functions or anything of that kind. It's the pure spirit called Purusha, which is in its primordial state, is called Ishvara. That is the Ishvara which Patanjali also follows, even though the Yoga Darshana is separate from the Sankhya Darshana. It has derived a lot from Sankhya. So if you get to know Sankhya and look at the concept of Ishvara, that Ishvara is mentioned also in the Yoga Sutras. Not that it is not mentioned, but only in three places altogether, which means it's not given that much importance as other aspects. So now the Yoga Sutras are divided into four parts. The first part is called the Samadhipada. The Samadhipada first gives a complete discussion on our consciousness, states of consciousness, why we are stuck, why we are not able to free ourselves from the bondage and the conditioning of the senses, and so on. And what is Samadhi? This is called Samadhipada, where when the mind becomes absolutely quiet, there is not a single ripple in the mind, then the mind kind of disappears, and in its place there is the Purusha. So therefore in every human being, man or woman, there is the essence of Purusha. Now the Purusha doesn't mean here male, it means consciousness, not male. So because when you normally say Purusha, it means here it means Purushartha, that way. So this Purusha is consciousness. And when the mind, ordinary mind, which is usually caught up in its circles, going round in circles all the time, caught by nature, when it frees itself from Prakriti, then it realizes that in true essence there is only the Purusha, there is nothing else. And that Purusha is not different from the Purusha, the primordial Purusha called Ishvara. Therefore, according to yoga, when a yogi reaches that state, he himself is Ishvara. He becomes almost equal to Ishvara. So, why I said almost is because there is still a physical body. So, there will be some limitations. We cannot deny that. So, almost Ishvara. So, this is the whole essence. Now, from Samadhi Pada, after you have understood why you are doing yoga, see, many people start the practice of yoga without knowing what are we looking for, where are we going, why do we do this. Of course, for physical health, yes, that's one part of the story, because yoga believes that a sound body needs to be there for a sound mind, and without a sound mind, you cannot transcend the mind. Intelligence is important, but the intelligent person very soon discovers the limitations of his own intellect, because intelligence is based on the inputs that come from our five senses, the indriyas, panchendriyas. And the inputs that come, the data that is fed into the brain by these five senses, generally is not accurate. It's inaccurate, and sometimes it could be an illusion also. Like, for instance, every morning we see the sunrise. Every morning we see the sunset. Why? Because our eyes, chakshu, one of the instruments of perception, says so. But even a high school boy will tell you that the sun neither rises nor sets. It's the earth that moves. So how can we trust the inputs that we receive? Always. Sometimes we can, sometimes we cannot. That are received through the sensory organs or the instruments of perception. And what we call our intellectual understanding is what the brain or the mind, let's say mind, does with the data received and makes it into a blueprint, which we call our rational understanding. It could be inaccurate. The yogi said that one needs to go beyond the understanding, beyond the data provided by the senses. Because the data provided by the senses is only of the three-dimensional world. We do not know of any fourth dimension at all using our ordinary sensory organs. Yogis say that there is much beyond. It's not just these little things that we define with our so called intellectual understanding. There's something more, much more. When one realizes that, one becomes a multi-dimensional human being, not just a three-dimensional. Fourth, fifth, sixth, it is endless. So, after understanding the chapter called Samadhi Pada, which is understanding the different levels of consciousness and how, when the mind is completely quiet and when the ignorance is cut from its root, one begins to identify oneself or understands that one is the Purusha, the Supreme Purusha, and nothing else. This is the aim of yoga. The next chapter is Sadhana Pada, or how to get there. Now, this is theory, it has been explained. How do you get there? Now, this is where Patanjali defines yoga as yoga's chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the stopping of the modifications of the mind. Modifications of the mind. So the whole of sadhana pada, which is ashtangas, 8 angas, which is yama niyama, rules, regulations. What are rules, regulations? Without rules in diet and without rules in sleep, one cannot even have a sane mind. Can you imagine somebody going deep into samadhi after drinking 3 pegs of whiskey? Is this possible? Not even 1 peg. Not possible. So there are some dietary restrictions. Unless you think that when you are drunk with whiskey, it is samadhi. That's a different story. So, so one needs to have some restrictions on this matter. So dietary restrictions, restrictions in how to stay awake, how much to sleep. Beautifully, Krishna has defined yama niyamas to Arjuna by saying this yoga is not for him who eats too much or eats too little or sleeps too much or sleeps too little. That means moderation is very, very important. This is the first yama niyama, moderation. Second, don't think of injuring others even in your mind, because you're going to be armed with extraordinary powers and capacities when you practice yoga. So if you are selfish and you mean harm to others, this is going to be a disaster. In fact, there is a safety valve. If you're not a good person, you will not get those vibhutis, generally. That's a good safety valve fixed by nature. So anyway, so these are the yama niyama. And simple living. There is one niyama called non-acceptance of gifts. Now, this is in this modern world very difficult to practice. However, why have they said that? You must ask the question, why have they said that? They have said that because once you start accepting gifts, then you would expect gifts from the person who comes to see you. And therefore, the person who doesn't bring the gifts is not so important. So, a yogi should live that way. Of course, nowadays you can't help it. People bring roses, flowers, things. Accept it, but understand that you're not flattered by it. So these are some of the Yamas. Then there is asana. I have described asanas here. They are postures meant to make the body healthy, also to affect the ductless glands in our system, the endocrine system, which controls all the emotions of our body and mind. So asanas are not merely physical exercises. They uh, um, they uh, what can I say? They facilitate the functioning of the endocrine system perfectly without excesses and without lowing down, in the middle somewhere, in a moderate way. Now, this is the function of asanas. I'll give you an example. Most of us don't have enough circulation of blood in our head. Why? Because we are all the time up. In fact, we don't want to bend our heads to anybody. That's okay. At least when nobody is there, one can do a few head downs with your doors shut. What does it matter? Why? Because the circulation of blood in your brain is very important to understand the mind and go beyond it. Without that, the intelligence also does not function to the optimum level. So we have head down postures. Then we have postures which massage the adrenal glands, which are in way chemically responsible for instance, anger, and so on and so forth. So there are many exercises. And the meditative postures like Padmasana are meant to clear certain nadis or channels of energy or prana in the system and to close some which we don't need for meditation. So this, and then we have pranayama, then pratyahara, dharana is meditation, and samadhi is the state attained through deep meditation. So these are the 8 angas of yoga. So this occurs in the sadhana pada, how to practice it. Then, if you have practiced it, and if you understand in the blueprint of where you are going after reading the samadhi pada, then you come to that stage which is called the vibhuti pada, where the yogi's sensory perceptions are heightened, where the yogi sees things which others cannot see, detects emotions which is very difficult to detect by others, um, can see through any false behavior on the part of someone who is standing or sitting before him, and also develop a light body and a clear voice and generally good health. So that's why it's called vibhuti. Vibhuti means capacity, extraordinary capacity developed by the yogi through the practice of yoga. The yogi also in that state acquires the capacity to disengage his consciousness from the physical body even before death. Uh, and therefore find out for himself that he is not the body. Okay. Then comes after Vibhuti Pada, Kaivalya Pada. Now, what happens in Vibhuti Pada? The mind has expanded so much, or the mind has become silent, and one is in touch with the consciousness, which is called Purusha. And therefore, the yogi has various capacities. Now, when the yogi realizes that these capacities are also of no use, is not even attracted or attached to them, and becomes silent, when he knows that he or she knows that there is only one reality, which is the Purusha, the spirit. And when this happens, there is complete peace. Uh, Pain and sorrow and disturbances and distractions come only when there are two. The yogi realizes there is only one, and that one is the primordial Purusha. You can call it Ishvara, or as the Vedantins call it in the human being, you can call it Jivatma. He realizes that the Jiva and the Supreme are not different. There's only one which is the perfect Supreme reality. You may call it Ishvara, you may call it Purusha, you may call it the Brahman. In that state, there is complete solitude, totally all one's desires are fulfilled without physically fulfilling them, and one is at absolute peace. This stage is called Kaivalya, and therefore the last chapter is called Kaivalya Pada. This, in a nutshell, is the description of this book called Yoga Also for the Godless, which Westland has published recently. Now, here are a few points to note. There is no denying the fact that this ancient science was discovered in this great country, in this ancient country, and two, that it is only one of the darshanas. There are other darshanas also. There is Vedanta, there is Nyaya, there is Mimamsa, there is Sankhya. These are all darshanas. And yoga is also an independent darshana, although it derives from many of the other darshanas. And for the first time, puts out a practical approach to that. How important yoga is can be seen even from the Bhagavad Gita. Now, you know that the Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters, 18 adhyayas, and each adhyaya is called a yoga. Look at that. The first one is Arjuna Vishada Yoga, yoga of Arjuna's sorrow. Because usually people wake up and think of higher things only when there is some sorrow. So sorrow is not to be run away from, it is to be faced. Because only when you face it can you go beyond it. So Arjuna Vishada Yoga. So Krishna keeps saying to Arjuna, face the facts. Don't imagine that you are, I can't do anything. Move forward, look at where you're going, and so on. So he's showing him the path of yoga. So it's called Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Then, of course, there is Sankhya Yoga, there is Karma Yoga, and so on and so forth. What I was going to say is at the last part of every chapter, there is one sloka, and that says, this is the Bhagavad Gita. Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita. So, this is the Bhagavad Gita. And what is the Bhagavad Gita? What does it teach? It is an Upanishad, Upanishadsu. And what is the Upanishad? What does the Upanishad teach? Brahma Vidyayam, the knowledge of the Supreme Being, the Brahman. Now the next word is important, Yoga Shastre. You can easily go from Brahma Vidyayam, Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvade, dialogue between Krishna Arjuna and so, but in between the word is introduced Yoga Shastre, because yoga is the practical techniques by which one can develop the capacity to understand the Brahma Vidya. Without training, the ordinary mind cannot understand Brahma Vidya. You can say orally, Aham Brahmasmi, but it means nothing. You eat, you drink, you excrete, you die. So how can you be Brahman? You cannot be Brahman. So it's something else. So to understand that, one has to transcend the ordinary mind. And yoga is the system with which you start with the body, then go to the mind systematically, and then go beyond the mind, transcend the mind, and reach the understanding of Brahma Vidya. So, this is the function of yoga. There are very many yogas, of course. Even devotion is called a yoga, bhakti yoga. Sankhya yoga, where you study the entire universe and then to find out the source. Vedanta, where you go into the understanding of who you really are, and then from there you understand that this world exists today and does not exist tomorrow, therefore it is temporary, and move out of this. Now, wait a minute. Where is the role of creator God and so on in this whole matter? Now, here comes the key question. Perhaps there might be a creator God, Brahma, not Brahman. Brahma is supposed to be the creative God. So the function of creation may have been performed by a deity, understood. But even that deity derives its power from the supreme reality whose spark is in every one of us. That's the good news. The all pervading supreme being, which is also the source of Brahma with its creative capacities, a spark of that supreme energy is also part of me. Therefore, Vedanta says, Tattvamasi, you are that, not this limited organism. You are much beyond. Now, this is a great concept. You're not what you think you are. You're not the limited self. You're much beyond. This is a great thing. The seed or the potential for infinite expansion is in us. It's not anywhere else. It's right inside us. Tapping that is the science of yoga. Swami Vivekananda used to say a story. He was very fond of the story. Somebody asked him whether yoga is kind of a hypnosis, meditation. He said precisely the opposite. He said it is dehypnosis. We have been hypnotized by nature into thinking that we are limited individuals, we are only this much, we cease to exist after death, we are existing only after birth, and so on. This is the brainwash that has come to us for centuries. To dehypnotize, decondition ourselves from this thought and say, no, we are ever existing infinite reality in essence, not this moving uh, entity which gets destroyed. That we are neither born nor do we die, we exist forever in reality. Not as this body or this identity, but in essence as consciousness. For that, he used to have a beautiful story that you need to recognize this. One has forgotten this. And the aim of yoga is to purify your mind, to make it quiet, free from all distractions, chitta vrittis, so that at one point it becomes so quiet that the understanding that one is not the limited body of the mind takes place, and one knows that one is part of the supreme, all pervading reality. The practical approach is yoga. Although theoretically there are many ways of looking at it, yoga is a practical approach to this. Now, I must tell you Swami Vivekananda's story. It's interesting. Apparently, uh, herd of, I don't know whether you call it herd or what, a group of deer. Uh, what are they called? A, a group of deers is called a herd, or what is it called? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, a small family of deers, let's say, lived in the forest. And one day, a pride of lions entered the forest and they started killing the deer for food. You must understand that animals kill only when they are hungry, not like us, not for entertainment. So, anyway, the lions came and started killing the deer, and the deer started running helter skelter here and there. And in the middle of this melee, the lions then finished the job and went off into the forest. They forgot to take a small lion cub which was left behind. The deer are generally very gentle by nature. They saw this little cub, no mother, it was lying there and crying, so they took hold of the little cub, looked after it, nursed it, probably drank milk from a deer mother, and grew up and became a lion. But having lived with these deer for so long, it behaved like a deer. It's, even its voice was like a deer. And if it heard wild animals roar, it used to go and hide like the deer. So this went on for a while. Of course, it was eating grass. You would wonder how lions eat grass, possibly. One day, the pride of lions came back. It was gathering, and they suddenly found that there is one of them walking around like a deer and making deer-like noises and getting frightened of them. So the lion, the head lion, looked at this and said, "This is one of us, maybe the cub that was left behind. He has grown up now into a big lion, but he still thinks he's a deer." So he caught him by the neck and took him to the pond, a still pond, like the mind of the yogi when it is free of all vrittis, chitta vritti nirodha. It's like a mirror which reflects perfectly without a ripple. He took the lion there and lion cub and said, "Look inside. What do you see? Do you look like us?" The cub looked, "Yes, I do look like you." He said, "Then why are you bleating? Can you roar?" He said, "How?" The lion gave him one shot and he roared. And he said, "Why are you among the deer? You're a lion. Come on." And he left with the pride. Now, this is exactly what the yogi does. He realizes that he is not the deer but the lion. He realizes that in true essence, he is the Purusha and not this body or the mind or anything one is identified with. Now, this can be theoretically understood, but to practically experience, one need to practice yoga of different kinds. This is only Patanjali's yoga is only one kind of yoga. There may be other kinds of yoga, jnana yoga, bhakti yoga, karma yoga. It depends upon the kind of person who needs to practice. If you go and tell a simple person who has so much devotion to his deity that he is quite happy and is moving forward, that you should stand on your head, you would be surprised. Why would I stand on my head? But having said that, yoga is a scientific step by step system by which one can purify one's mind, clear the mind of distractions, calm it down, and in that tranquility, reflect the divine. This is the aim of yoga. So, per se, it does not need the support of a creator God, but it does need help from a teacher who has gone through this whole field and knows where the pitfalls are. That is important. But that teacher does not ask the disciple to surrender, rather, he asks the disciples to think and find out for himself or herself the reality of the situation, not accept whatever I say. Because a dialogue is important, and dialogue is part of yoga, dialogue is part of Vedanta, dialogue is part of the Gita, dialogue is part of our ancient science which has come to us from the Upanishads. Samvada. In Samvada, both are equal in a way. Because even if you are highly evolved spiritually, bring yourself down to the level of the person asking the question. Otherwise, you won't be able to explain to that person properly. So, when all these things are put together, I would call that yoga. And the person who practices it is a yogi. And therefore, whether you believe in God or whether you don't believe in God, if you practice yoga step by step, going by the Yoga Sutras or other yogic texts, then in the end you can conclude whether there is God or there is no God. There is no need to assume in the beginning of the journey. This is the it's 6:45 now. So I think I'm going to stop now, and we have a few minutes when we can still answer any questions which might have come or which uh, mm, Atul Bhai
Yes,
can have.
yes, sir. Uh, Thank you very much, sir, for enlightening us in a very lucid way the synthesis of the Ashtanga Yoga and Patanjali Yoga Sutras with the basic fundamental understandings.